The Omar Cooper steam right now feels like the Ricky Pearsall steam from a couple years ago. Dane Brugler had Omar Cooper at 27 overall. Now, this is the first time that I've ranked him ahead of Elijah Sarratt, but I think the draft capital is going to reflect this one. I think there's a chance Omar Cooper sneaks into the first round of the NFL draft. He's got tremendous yak ability, contested catch ability. I think that there's a lot to like with Omar Cooper. Really, really fun player, early entrant. And I think that the NFL teams are going to value him. Redraft ends, but Dynasty is life. I'm Theo Greminger. This is Dynasty Life solo show. We are in the midst of the NFL Combine. Combine started. We have not gotten to the skill position players. So for fantasy football, unless you're an IDP player, IDP managers, maybe go draft some Sonny Styles from Ohio State, linebacker. But for most of you watching this or listening to this on the podcast, we're concerned about fantasy football. We're concerned about winning dynasty leagues. And this class keeps getting beaten up. And I understand that this class is not last year, especially for specific positions. But when it comes down to it, I think this class has gotten maybe overly beat up to the point where I've tried to pivot some rookie picks to 2027 picks in certain spots. And I've even pivoted off of some late first-round picks for some players. But I'm not afraid to use these rookie picks either. I think that this class is going to end up producing some players that help us in fantasy football and some players that I think could be very good for fantasy football. So I'm going to take more of an optimistic approach with this class. And we're going to talk about my top 25 rankings heading in to the NFL Combine. So I'm going to obviously adjust things after the Combine. And we don't want to overly adjust things. We don't want to double count athletic testing numbers where certain players who we know are going to be really fast and athletic, we don't want to overly count it. But we don't want to discount it either because we've been burned before in the past. I remember a few years back getting very excited about the profile of Troy Franklin of Oregon, now for the Denver Broncos, who had a number of really strong weeks this past season. But heading into the Combine, it was a player that I thought was going to be drafted a lot higher than he ended up being. And the Combine hurt him because he was supposed to be fast and wasn't. So the Combine can absolutely hurt players. It also can help players because just because we know Kenyon Sadiq is athletic, if he goes up to the Combine and has a huge Combine, it's not like that's a negative. And it's not like we should brush it aside because it's him displaying the athletic traits that we're sort of cautiously optimistic that he has. And he's going to display it with numbers that the NFL trusts. So for me, the Combine matters. I like the Combine. I enjoy watching the Combine. And if you can't enjoy watching the Combine right now when there's no football going on, check your pulse. Anthony Richardson's Combine a couple years ago, that was absolutely electric. If you couldn't get a little bit hyped about watching Xavier Worthy break the all-time record for the 40-yard dash. So, you guys can let me know in the comments if you're watching this on YouTube. Do you enjoy the NFL Combine? I mean, we got some fun stuff. We got the gauntlet. We got some quarterbacks that are going to throw. So there's a lot to talk about. I'm going to talk about my top 25 Superflex rankings for tight end premium. This is how I have it heading into the Combine, but I'm very open-minded. And at the end of the day, I'm going to let draft capital be a big factor in how these rankings end up. And that's how you should be as well. So we want to take a look at all these segments. I think right now we have the Senior Bowl, a number of how the players did at the Senior Bowl. We have, for a lot of these players, how they did in a 3 or 4 year college career. We also have, for a lot of these players, in the ever-changing marketplace of NIL and the transfer portal, we have an idea of how these players did in multiple systems and multiple schools and multiple levels. For some of these players, at 2 or 3 schools. So we have a huge sample size. We have everything leading up to the Combine, and then the Combine is another big data point for us in fantasy football. And then the ultimate data point for us, draft capital. Draft capital matters a lot. Certainly landing spots matter, but ultimately being said, especially when we're talking about like wide receivers, talking about running backs, certainly quarterbacks, we're talking about draft capital. Draft capital is going to be another factor. So throughout the offseason, we're going to talk about all these factors. It's like a book. We have a couple of chapters where we've already read, and now we're going to get a couple more when it comes to the NFL Combine, and then down the line with the draft capital that's reflected to these players. NFL teams rarely have to tell us the truth, and one of the times that they have to tell us the truth is the actual NFL draft. So with every week, we're getting closer and closer to it. We're going to be broadcasting it from Fantasy Points YouTube, Brett Whitefield and myself, Thomas Tipple, Scott Barrett, Ryan Heath. It's going to be an awesome experience just like it was this past year. Really looking forward to that one. But let's get it started. Superflex, tight end premium, Dynasty rookie rankings. Not a whole lot of surprises if you've been listening to me up until now, but I have tweaked these heading into the Combine, and this is where I'm at. Number one overall, there's no secrets here. Everybody knows what I'm going to say. It's Jeremiyah Love, and I think Jeremiyah Love is going to step into the NFL as a top 6 asset at the running back position, if not higher. And it's a very reasonable pivot when it comes to if you don't love your top-notch player on your dynasty roster, if you want to pivot and get a little bit younger and maybe a little bit more unknown upside, pivoting to Jeremiyah Love is fine. And I think last year in these Superflex startup drafts, we saw Ashton Genty steam up to like running back 1 overall for a short period of time, going ahead of a Bijan, ahead of a Jahmyr Gibbs. I think Genty this year, fantasy managers who made that sort of investment and were not rewarded right away, has created sort of a marketplace where Jeremiyah Love is in fact a value. If you're drafting early right now in FFPC on Underdog, in the best ball streets or in the early redraft streets, you're seeing Jeremiyah Love available to you in the late second round. I think that's a little bit of a bargain price to pay, considering Jeremiyah Love might end up in the top 5 in the NFL draft. And there's a number of landing spots where there's no landing spot that's absolutely perfect for him there, but there's a number of landing spots where he would immediately be the focal point in the offense. He also has an extremely fantasy-friendly profile where you're talking about home run hitting ability as a runner and the ability to play all 3 downs and contribute as a receiver. So not a whole lot to dislike about Jeremiyah Love. And I think if we were putting together a big board, and Brett Whitefield and I are certainly going to discuss top 100 rankings in terms of a big board over on the 2026 NFL Draft podcast. If you enjoy NFL Draft content, make sure you subscribe to that one. I think Jeremiyah Love is going to be Brett's top-ranked offensive player, and he's my top-ranked offensive player as well. I think the market's correct having him as the 101 in all formats. Now, 2 for me, I struggled with this one. I'm seeing a lot of people pushing Fernando Mendoza up to 2. I'm going to refrain from doing that because I think Carnell Tate could be special. When it comes to Carnell Tate, I think we're talking about an alpha outside wide receiver. I think that the NFL Combine is going to be very beneficial to him as well, where I think Carnell Tate is going to be a guy that runs in the 4.4s. And when you have him at 6'3", running there at close to 200 pounds, I think we're talking about a player that the NFL is going to really embrace. He's got ability as a deep threat. He's a great route runner. He doesn't drop anything. I think this is a true outside threat at the wide receiver position. Now, a lot of these guys are not the ones that are driving the needle for fantasy football. When we talk about guys like Jackson Smith and Jigba, Amon-Ra St. Brown, these sort of profiles, they're different than Carnell Tate. But I think that the way the NFL is going to view Carnell Tate is at the end of the day, I think we could end up seeing him as a top 5 selection in the NFL draft. We've whispered the name A.J. Green, and it's not hyperbole. I think that's the dream if you're a believer in Carnell Tate. I think a lot of people making realistic comparisons. I'll give a shout out to Dave Kluge. I think Dave Kluge had the George Pickens one. He's been a guest on this show. I think that's a realistic one. But we saw an 18-point per game season out of George Pickens, and I think it would be a fast-track type event for Carnell Tate. The other thing, when we look at some of these profiles like the George Pickens, second-round draft capital, Carnell Tate's going to be a top 5 to top 10 pick. I think the floor for Carnell Tate is 9 overall to the Kansas City Chiefs. I don't think he lasts past 9, and I think he could go as early as 4, 5, somewhere in that range. So Carnell Tate locked in for me at the 102 in Superflex drafts, also in single QB formats, which I know a lot of you don't like me talking about, but hey, I play a lot of single and a lot of Superflex. So shout out to my single QB listeners as well. 3 overall. Now we're talking Fernando Mendoza. Fernando Mendoza is a locked-in starter for a long time in his NFL career. I think that we've talked about names like Jared Goff. We've talked about names like Squint, and he makes a couple of Joe Burrow-type plays. He has the ability to extend plays with his legs. I think Fernando Mendoza is the type of presence that's going to earn a starting role very, very quickly. I think he's a day one starter in the NFL, and I think it's pretty cut and dry for us in Superflex formats. If you're quarterback needy, push Fernando Mendoza up to the 102. And I think it's perfectly fine to take him ahead of wide receivers we really, really like, because I think he's locked in here. The leash that number 1 overall picks have, they get second chances too. So if this is a failure, someone else is going to take an opportunity on Fernando Mendoza. We've seen it a few times over where these number 1 overall picks get a second opportunity. But him falling in line to the Las Vegas Raiders in a Clint Kubiak offense with Brock Bowers as his number 1 target, I mean, that's a pretty good place to be. And when we look at the amount of cap space that Vegas has, and we look at the fact that it's a Clint Kubiak offense, there's a lot to like about the Fernando Mendoza profile. And the guy just won a national title for Indiana. I mean, Indiana had a strong roster. At the end of the day, we're going to mention Omar Cooper, Elijah Sarratt. They're both in my top 25. But at the end of the day, Fernando Mendoza won big games. He had made key passes in key moments in the national title game against that Miami defense with a bunch of Sunday players. The Penn State game, end of the game, one at Oregon. There's a lot to like right here about Fernando Mendoza. Beat Ohio State in the Big Ten championship game. A lot to like about Fernando Mendoza and the profile he brings for us as Superflex managers. 4 overall, Makai Lemon. Makai Lemon, I get it. I get the people pushing Makai Lemon up above Carnell Tate, above Jordyn Tyson. I think that the draft capital for Makai Lemon is going to end up being in the top 15 in the NFL draft. I think that's great. Makai Lemon profiles as a player that can do a lot of the things that we're seeing some of the top scorers at the wide receiver position do at the NFL level. Jackson Smith and Jigba. You talk about Amon-Ra St. Brown. I think Makai Lemon has some of those traits where if he gets in the right offensive scheme and you have a coordinator who says, we want to get Makai Lemon some of these easy button targets, we want to use him in a variety of ways, I think you're talking about a player who could be a 150 target player at some time early in his career. And that should be very, very exciting for us in fantasy football. Makai Lemon, just an unbelievable season production-wise this year at USC. I mean, the tape is silly this year. Really, really strong stuff. He's also 21 years old. There's a little bit of room to run, and the yak ability. When you get the ball in Makai Lemon's hands, very, very good things happen. So I really like Makai Lemon. I understand the people who want to push him up to wide receiver 1 overall. I think it's very close with him and Carnell Tate. And certainly, post-NFL draft, I am open-minded to adjusting this. If Makai Lemon ends up being selected by Kansas City at 9 overall, that's a spot where I would absolutely love it. Obviously, we have to adjust things post-NFL draft, but I think Makai Lemon, really, really strong profile. The guy's going to earn a ton of targets in the NFL. He's going to score a lot of fantasy points. I just have him behind Carnell Tate. The next player I'm going to list at 5 overall, very easy one to understand, Jordyn Tyson. Jordyn Tyson has really good size here. Again, he's 21 years old, 6'2", 200 pounds, profiles like a wide receiver 1 at the next level. And I think the draft capital is going to be very friendly to Jordyn Tyson. We've got to see what the physicals are going to look like at the NFL level. He's had multiple injuries throughout his career. Nothing overlapping, so it's something we're sort of able to give him a benefit of the doubt for. But Jordyn Tyson profiles as a wide receiver 1 overall at the next level. Really, really strong stuff at Arizona State. Transferred over there from Colorado. We know that Jordyn Tyson has this amazing lineage where his brother is in the NBA. Jalen Tyson playing well this year. Jalen Tyson was like a first round pick in the NBA. He was like the top 20 pick a few years back. And now you see Jordyn Tyson, who's going to be a first round pick in the NFL. So really, really athletic pedigree he's coming from. Lot to like about Jordyn Tyson. Jordyn Tyson also, we could see him inside the top 10. I think there's a scenario where all three wide receivers go inside the top 10, sort of a dream scenario for us in fantasy football. And I don't think Jordyn Tyson falls out of like the top 15 to 18 picks. Really, really strong prospect. Really, really fun tape at Arizona State. So Jordyn Tyson locked in. My number 6 overall player is Casey Concepcion. And I think Casey Concepcion is awesome. I think he is a dynamic player. Big play waiting to happen. And I think when we talk about all those wonderful things about Makai Lemon, Casey Concepcion, for a lot of landing spots, could be used in very similar ways, where I think he's going to end up earning a lot of targets at the NFL level. I don't think that the market is quite locked in on him being a first-round pick, but over here at Fantasy Points we are. Brett Whitefield and I have both projected Casey Concepcion to be a first-round pick. Brett's even higher on him than I am. And that's kind of scary because I'm very high on him. But I think Casey Concepcion, if you're a dynasty manager and you're holding those 106 spots, I think your dream is that Casey Concepcion gets a really good landing spot inside the top 20 overall picks. And it sort of makes this draft class a lot better. Also 21 years old for KC. Really, really a fun prospect. Went from NC State to Texas A&M. Was the focal point for Texas A&M's offense this year. I think Casey Concepcion, a really, really strong prospect. 7 overall for me is Denzel Boston. Great size with Denzel Boston. I mean, we talk about Carnell Tate. Boston's even bigger. You're talking about a 6'4", 210 pounds, somewhere in that 205 to 210 range. Really has the ability to be an awesome threat inside the red zone. Can make plays downfield, and profiles to me like a player who will be a wide receiver 1, and that's an important thing. NFL teams are going to draft him looking at him as a player who can be a Drake London for them, who can be that big outside threat, who also earns targets. I'm very into Denzel Boston. I think he's a really strong one. And remember, this is tight end premium, but I'm still having Denzel Boston checking in at 7 overall. And 8 overall for me is Kenyon Sadiq. And I think we know Kenyon Sadiq is very athletic, but I think after the combine, he's going to tear it up. I think Kenyon Sadiq is going to just rip it up at the NFL combine. Shout out to Bruce Feldman, who works for The Athletic. I wrote for The Athletic for about a season and a half there. I did a couple articles this past offseason. So I'll give a shout out to Bruce Feldman because Bruce Feldman writes the Freaks List. And every summer, this is appointment reading for me. It's been a great indicator of future NFL talent where he's able to identify these hyper-athletic guys at the college level. A lot of them end up doing really big things at the NFL level on both sides of the ball. But he wrote this week about Kenyon Sadiq as a player who's going to tear it up at the combine. Just a couple of numbers to keep an eye on. The vertical leap. This past summer, Kenyon Sadiq had a 41.5-inch vertical leap, and he bench pressed 435 pounds. And he power cleaned 365 while weighing 255 pounds. He's probably going to be like 245 at the combine. I don't think he comes in at 255. But you're talking about next level athleticism and a player who NFL teams are going to draft highly. Kenyon Sadiq will be a top 20 pick in the NFL draft. I feel pretty strong about that statement. We've done mock drafts where he falls a little bit, and he falls into that 25 to 27 range. But I would be willing to bet that after the combine, he's a player that NFL teams are going to really prioritize. And again, we know he's athletic. This isn't double counting. This is validation on these numbers. Kenyon Sadiq, Oregon, younger player. Talk about his athletic ability. And I'll give a shout out to Scott Barrett, Ryan Heath. I think that there's going to be a number of people at Fantasy Points, maybe not as high on Kenyon Sadiq as I am and Brett Whitefield are. And I think that's fine. We don't want everyone to agree over here, or what are we talking about? We're all just going to get it together and say you're right. We're all thinking together. So I understand the analytical concerns that we would have liked to seen a little more production out of Kenyon Sadiq, but I do think with this level of athleticism, this level of draft capital and the fact that he's a younger player, he has room to run with this profile. I think Kenyon Sadiq will be immediately in my top 12 Dynasty tight end rankings as soon as I am ranking the rookies. And you can get all my Dynasty rankings over at Fantasy Points. We did a big update to the single QB rankings this week. We're going to keep updating them as free agency happens and all that sort of stuff. You want to get a leg up on your Dynasty mates. You can use the code fantasy. I have a couple of codes, but I'll give out the Fantasy Football Daily code for this one. I also host that show. So Kenyon Sadiq comes in at number 8 for me. Now we're talking a little bit of running backs here. And this is sort of can this class be saved at the running back position? I think absolutely it can. When you talk about Jeremiyah Love, he's locked in. Now there's a battle to see who's going to be the number 2 running back drafted. And for me, I've done a lot of soul searching on this one. I'm higher on this running back class than a number of people. And there's guys like Jonah Coleman, guys like Mike Washington, Kaytron Allen. But for me, it's Jadarian Price. And I think NFL teams are going to love Jadarian Price. I think there's a chance that he goes inside the top 40 overall, which a lot of people aren't really saying that right now. He is, much like Jeremiyah Love, an explosive big play threat at the running back position. He has great special teams values to teams as a return man. Really, really exciting player. Now, he's going to weigh in about 205 to 210 range. Probably more of a high-value touch, high-end committee back, where when I say committee, it's not to like knock the guy. Most NFL backfields now are not a full-on bell cow, but I think Jadarian Price could end up being like the 70 in a 70-30 backfield, a 65 in a 65-35, and he's got that home run hitting ability. I think that the NFL is going to like him. I think the NFL is going to draft him highly. Brett and I have talked about sort of that sweet spot in the second round with teams like New Orleans, teams like Houston, teams like Minnesota in the second round. I think Jadarian Price is going to end up there. So I have Jadarian Price at 9 overall. Again, with all of my running back rankings here, I sort of have this cluster from like 9 through 15 where I'm willing to readjust these after the actual NFL draft. If Jadarian Price falls to the end of the third and one of these other guys ends up going at like pick 40, I'm going to adjust my priors here. But I think Jadarian Price is going to go higher than a lot of people are projecting. I think early second round for him, and I think it's going to be a player that a lot of times when it's like the number 2 back on an offense and it's the second back, there's always a little bit of trepidation with that one. Sure, we got burned years back with Roschon Johnson and Bijan Robinson, but that's not the case here with Jadarian Price. And certainly last year, we walk away knowing Quinshon Judkins is good at football, and so is Travion Henderson. Both of those guys drafted out of the same backfield. Go back a couple years back, Javonte Williams, Michael Carter, both of them did some very good things as rookies out of UNC. So it's happened before. Jadarian Price locked in for me at 9. 10 overall, Jonah Coleman, Washington. Jonah Coleman's a fun prospect. I mean, he's a bowling ball. He's thick. He can catch the ball out of the backfield. Like 5'8.5", 5'9", but like almost 230 pounds. Has the ability to be a 3-down back, which is really exciting at the next level. Built like Doug Martin in his prime. R.I.P. Doug Martin there. But Jonah Coleman, like thick back who can handle 3-down skill set, and he can catch the ball out of the backfield. Thinking like a David Montgomery path where that's sort of the level I think he could get to, if not higher. Montgomery obviously would have liked to seen more receptions in multiple seasons, but that's sort of like the level for a couple of these guys like Jonah Coleman. So I'm excited about Jonah Coleman, and I think he could end up being a top 45 pick. Top 50 pick, I think, would be sort of where we're going to see him at. So second round draft capital is what we're projecting. Now, how fast is Jonah Coleman going to be? We don't really want to overrate the 40 time at the running back position. I mean, I like seeing my guys fast. I don't know about you, but I do think that a bad 40 time could hurt him with the draft capital. So we want to see him. What would be a good time for Jonah Coleman? Anything that says 4.5 something would be good for him. When we go much, much lower than that, I think then we have to say, where's the NFL going to value him here? Certainly the combine matters for Jonah Coleman, but for me, he's locked in. Really, really fun player coming out of Washington. So 2 Washington Huskies, Denzel Boston at 7, Jonah Coleman at 10. 11 for me, and this is a player where I talked to Mike Shope on his radio show. He also came on Fantasy Football Daily. And I said that the Omar Cooper steam right now feels like the Ricky Pearsall steam from a couple years ago, where Pearsall had this wonderful Senior Bowl, steamed into the first round of the NFL draft. Not a lot of people were projecting him there. Dane Brugler had Omar Cooper at 27 overall. So 11 for me, Omar Cooper, wide receiver, Indiana. This is the first time that I've ranked him ahead of Elijah Sarratt. But I think the draft capital is going to reflect this one. I think there's a chance Omar Cooper sneaks into the first round of the NFL draft. He's got tremendous yak ability, contested catch ability, an incredible highlight reel from Indiana this year where Omar Cooper really had some outstanding plays. Obviously, if you watched Indiana, a ton of Fernando Mendoza, a ton of Elijah Sarratt, but also Omar Cooper. Just great hands. I don't remember watching a drop with him. I think that there's a lot to like with Omar Cooper. Really, really fun player, early entrant, and I think that the NFL teams are going to value him. So I'm putting him at 11. 12 overall, another player who I think is going to rip it up at the Combine, another Bruce Feldman's freak list guy, and another tight end. Again, we're talking tight end premium rankings. So if you're playing FFPC or even that's a 1.5 premium, or in leagues with a higher premium, Eli Stowers, Vanderbilt, my number 2 tight end right now. Stowers is really, really fun. This is per Bruce Feldman's article. He had a 11.3 broad jump and vertical leap of 39 inches, power cleaned 360, and he is going to have a really, really great athletic testing numbers coming out of the Combine. So Eli Stowers, interesting one, where he was a quarterback recruit, ends up switching to tight end. Really fun. And we saw the production this year, specifically at Vanderbilt, for actually multiple seasons, where Stowers, a ton more production than we saw with Kenyon Sadiq. So a lot to like with Eli Stowers. Really, really a fun player. And I think tight end premium managers get to know the name now. How do I think he's going to end up as a draft pick? I'm very open-minded to those teams at the very end of the first round, where everybody's mock drafting the Denver Broncos to take maybe a best available defensive player. There's a lot of defensive players, sort of the rich get richer. They take that great defense and they add a CJ Allen into the mix or something like that. Then you've got the New England Patriots, where after the Super Bowl, everybody's like, Patriots got to get a wide receiver or an offensive lineman, period. But I look at Eli Stowers as viable options at the end of round 1 for those teams. And if he's not selected at the end of the first round, I think he's off the board in those first 10 picks of round 2. Really, really fun player. I think the draft capital is going to be somewhere between where we saw Dalton Kincaid drafted and where we saw Sam Laporta drafted. So if you remember sort of that range where Michael Mayer went between those two in that really, really tight end heavy draft a couple years back, I think that's where we're going to end up seeing Eli Stowers. So somewhere in that 28 through 40 range. I think he's that sort of player. And I think from fantasy circles, you're going to see more and more people with the Stowers over Sadiq for fantasy. But I think that's got to go out the window if Sadiq gets sort of draft capital and testing numbers that I see for him. So it's okay to like both. I clearly do. I have both inside my top 12. Got stuck in Florida this past week. I mean, people like, I live on Long Island. When I tell people that, they're like, Theo, you don't talk to me right now, because I was inside in the blizzard. Certainly, shout out to my Boston people, Philadelphia people, everybody on the East Coast just getting banged with this blizzard. But I did get stuck in Florida, so this recording was supposed to be earlier in the week. And shout out to Scott Barrett, who recorded a Fantasy Football Daily for me. But yeah, catching up end of the week. Have some cool recordings across the board, but great trip to Florida. Shout out to all my Floridians out there. Love the state of Florida. Got a chance to spend an extended time with you guys, but back on Long Island, back to the grind here, and ready for the NFL Combine this weekend. I'm recording on Sunday morning with Ryan Heath, and I don't record on Sundays usually, but we're going to break down the Combine for you, some Combine winners. You're not going to get that on the Dynasty Life feed. You're not going to get that on the Dynasty Points feed. You're only going to get that special episode with Ryan Heath and myself over on the Fantasy Points Dynasty YouTube. So check out our new YouTube channel. We've had a ton of subscribers. Subscribe to it, and you're going to get special episodes with myself, with Ryan Heath, with Thomas Tipple, with Jacob Sanderson, and with some very, very cool guests. Not everything gets over to the Dynasty Life podcast feed or the Dynasty Points podcast feed. We're doing a lot of YouTube-specific stuff, so make sure you check that out. I'm going to rip through the rest of the players here. I'll try to be as quick as possible. 13 overall for me, Elijah Sarratt, who I love. I know that Brett Whitefield absolutely loves Elijah Sarratt. Really, really a fun player. Don't want to get head over heels here. I've made mistakes in the past with overvaluing this sort of profile. But with Elijah Sarratt, I think he projects to be a really, really good wide receiver 2 at the next level. And I think he could be an opportunistic wide receiver 1 at the next level. I also think he has the ability to command targets at the next level, which is really important. The storyline for Elijah Sarratt is just awesome. St. Francis of PA ends up going to James Madison, then leaves with that exodus of James Madison players who came with Curt Cignetti to Indiana, and then he rips it up at Indiana. So you talk about a player who's earned everything. We love seeing that sort of pathway to the NFL. Elijah Sarratt is locked in. I think ultimately he's a second-round pick, and ultimately I think this sort of reflects that. I think he's a high second-round pick in the NFL draft and probably a high second-round pick for us in these Superflex rankings. So I have him locked in at 13 overall. Now I'm back to the running back well for 3 straight picks. Mike Washington, 14 overall. Mike Washington is an absolute rocket ship to the moon this offseason. Was the best running back at the Senior Bowl. Really, really a fun pathway for him. We talk about players who have earned it. Mike Washington spent time at Buffalo, spent time at New Mexico State, and at Arkansas in the SEC. He's 230 pounds, and he's about to tear it up at the NFL Combine. I think that he's got the size, and he will have the size speed ability. He also can catch the football out of the backfield. He's much closer to the Jadarian Price, Jonah Coleman duo than maybe some people want to let on. I think Mike Washington's really, really good. Now, I like those other guys better than Washington right now, but I'm open-minded. I think Washington needs to be projected to be selected as a day 2 pick, which matters for us. And I know there's some of you out there that'll say round 3 versus round 4. I don't care anymore. And I know there's some really smart people right now in fantasy football who are on that train. And certainly we've had a lot of usable, if not great, production out of Woody Marks, Bucky Irving, etc. out of round 4. But I still want to see NFL teams invest in Mike Washington on day 2. And I think ultimately people are going to like the running back class a little bit more after the actual NFL draft when you end up seeing Coleman, Price, Mike Washington as day 2 picks. And now we talk about a player who is really, really potentially a very, very fun one. It's Emmett Johnson. And Emmett Johnson out of Nebraska checks in for me at 15 overall, about 200 pounds. So smaller side, but he also can really catch the ball. So he's got 3-down ability, really impressive numbers this past year at Nebraska, and just an absolute ton of production as a receiver as well. So Emmett Johnson, Nebraska, early entry into the NFL draft, came out early. I think that guys are way smarter on their decision-making when they're coming out early. So you have to think he's getting told by the committee, the advisory board, that he's probably a day 2 selection. And now he could lose out on that. Certainly there's a lot of factors that players could lose out on. But I think there's been some promises made to Emmett Johnson to get his NFL career started now. We saw so many backs last year sort of return to school. Both the Penn State guys who I haven't mentioned yet, they both returned to school. There's such a chance that guys return to school because that NIL money for these running backs can be tremendous in the right spot. So the fact that Emmett Johnson's coming out, I think, speaks volumes to where the draft capital is going to be. Now, a lot of really smart analytical people, you talk about like profiles people don't love, like Kenyon Sadiq. The analytical community is going to love Emmett Johnson after what he did at Nebraska last year. So I understand a little bit of red flags with the weight, but I think he can play, and the ability to really, really thrive in some sort of a committee role. Right after him, Kaytron Allen. I'll put them all in a bunch here. Kaytron Allen, Penn State, all-time leading rusher in Penn State history. Kaytron Allen is an absolute beast. I really love this profile. I could have ranked him higher. Again, this is a difficult one. 23, so a little bit older. He's 220 pounds. Powerful back. I mean, I think the dream for him is he ends up becoming a bell cow for someone where he sustains volume and you see sort of a Penn State path for Kaytron Allen. Does he get there right away? Does he end up in a situation where he's a high-profile backup year one? The draft capital is going to matter for Kaytron Allen, and the landing spot's going to matter. I've said that this would be a perfect pick for the Baltimore Ravens to have him back up Derrick Henry, and maybe in year 2, year 3, he takes over. That sort of scenario, I think, is going through NFL teams' heads. Also, Kaytron Allen thrived in a committee role in multiple seasons. So we saw, again, what would happen with Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins, their ability to coexist and their ability to be really, really talented. I think Kaytron Allen playing alongside Nick Singleton, that mattered at Penn State. So Kaytron Allen, sort of a no-brainer pick for me at 16. And then we'll get away from the running backs for a pick here. I'm back at the wide receiver well, and I'm going with Chris Brazzell from Tennessee. Tulane to Tennessee. And what's interesting is I think if we would have said the words Chris Brazzell, Tulane, and he would have had the same level of production at Tulane with a 6'5", 200-pound, hyper-athletic profile, I think people might get more into it, even though we're talking about an SEC player versus a guy at the American. People are just so down on Tennessee, and for good reason. This has been an offense where it hasn't progressed at the NFL level. Jalen Hyatt hasn't done a thing. Jalen Wright, we would have liked to have seen more. Obviously, he's boxed out by Devon Achane. That's a little bit of a disappointment. The story is still out on Dylan Sampson. Certainly, Cedric Tillman had a few moments, but it hasn't been a great run for Tennessee players, especially at the wide receiver position. But Chris Brazzell, really, really a fun prospect here. 6'5", 200, and he can run. So I think Chris Brazzell, the draft capital, is going to get reflected. Brett Whitefield also likes the tape from Tulane. They used him in many different ways. So Brett Whitefield, he goes really deep with the film analysis here. He's on Chris Brazzell as well. And we don't want a helmet scout, and we don't want a helmet hate. And I think there's a lot of helmet haters out there who are brushing him aside because they've been burned by Tennessee. All it takes is one, though. All it takes is one of these guys, and all of a sudden our perceptions we become a little more open-minded to the thing. So we don't want to draft a guy because he's a wide receiver from Ohio State or LSU. It's been pretty good business to draft those guys, but we don't want to draft them only because they're from these schools, and we don't want to be closed-minded because you were burned before. Doesn't mean you're going to be burned again. So I'll keep an open mind with Chris Brazzell. Again, the draft capital I think is going to be good for him. We'd like to see him inside the top 45 picks, and I think he could get there. 18 overall for me, Ty Simpson, and there's just such a range here. If Ty Simpson ends up being a first-round pick in the NFL draft, you have to push him up this list, and I will too. If he's has a starting quarterback pathway at the NFL level relatively early in his career, I'm very open-minded to drafting him. Red flag for me with Ty Simpson, the lack of college starts. Guys with lack of college starts, those guys have struggled at the next level. And for fantasy football, we've seen a lot of guys sort of lose their spots, lose their starting job. So I want to keep an eye on this one with Ty Simpson. Had some good moments for Alabama this year, really good moments. Early in the season, absolutely cooking. Down the stretch, a couple of really bad performances there. Obviously, the playoff game against Indiana, brutally ugly. Obviously, the game against Georgia, SEC title game, really, really tough one to watch. But Ty Simpson, there's enough there that NFL teams are very open-minded to drafting him and drafting him early. And if we see him drafted 13 overall to the LA Rams, or we see him go to the Jets a few picks later in sort of that top 18 range, I think we have to be open-minded with moving Ty Simpson up. But for now, heading into the NFL Combine, I'm going to keep him right there at 18 overall. 19 overall, it sort of pains me to have this player here. Chris Bell, Louisville. And Chris Bell was on a pathway where I would have had him maybe 7 spots higher. Throughout the season, it would just be Saturdays, and I would text Brett Whitefield and be like, yo, we got A.J. Brown. And he'd say, kind of slow your roll here. And obviously it was a little hyperbole, but that's how Chris Bell looked in some of these games for Louisville. Had an unbelievable year. The tape against Miami when Louisville upset them. Multiple ACC games where Bell was just absolutely a true alpha at the wide receiver position and made a lot of like squint and you see A.J. Brown type plays. Now you're going to have to deal with him coming off of a torn ACL. How do NFL teams view him coming off the torn ACL, knowing that they're going to have to wait on him? We've seen teams draft these guys with torn ACLs and sort of just understand, I'm drafting the talent, I'm going to let it happen. So let's see where the draft capital is, but really exciting player. But again, injury discount, and understand you're going to get no production from him until he heals up. So Chris Bell for me at 19. 20 overall, Nick Singleton, Penn State. A year ago, Nick Singleton, I mean, this is a player that probably should have entered the NFL draft last year. And I think there's prospect for, and that's despite it being a very competitive NFL draft class last year. But Nick Singleton, much like Kaytron Allen, if you open up the history books at Penn State, this guy has scored a ton of touchdowns. This guy has a ton of production in terms of rushing yardage. And Nick Singleton is a big-time athlete who is a player who can catch the ball out of the backfield. So you're talking about a 220-pound plus running back who can catch the ball, has great athletic measurables, and a ton of college production. I think NFL teams are going to have – there's going to be a little bit of a correction after the NFL draft when it comes to Nick Singleton. Now, of course, he's injured, so he won't be participating in the NFL Combine, which is a little disappointing. But I think, again, this is a player that he suffered a foot injury at the Senior Bowl practice, so that's going to keep him out. He had surgery earlier this month in February. So I think that the healing process for Nick Singleton, he's going to miss the on-the-field drills at the Combine, but he's still going to be viewed as one of the better running back prospects. And again, the stats are just silly. 55 touchdowns as a Penn State Nittany Lion and nearly 6,000 combined yards. I mean, that's crazy. So Nick Singleton still stays locked in for me at 20. 21, wide receiver Germie Bernard out of Alabama. I think ultimately Germie Bernard's going to be a second-round pick, and maybe a high one at that. I had Cody Carpentier on this show recently. We did a Dynasty rookie draft. He's very, very high on Germie Bernard. You can go and listen to Cody's takes on him. Brett's a little lower than Cody is on him, but I think Brett doesn't dislike him. Just has him maybe a little bit lower than we do. 22 overall for me, Justin Jolly. Justin Jolly is a player that I really want to see have a good combine and get good draft capital because he's a really, really fun prospect. There's a few of these move tight ends in this draft class. I like Michael Trigg a lot. I've talked about him, but I really do like Justin Jolly. He's smaller. He's 6'3", and he's going to weigh around 250. And I think that he's a true move tight end. Has some really impressive tape at NC State. So I'm really hoping we get this sort of draft capital. There's some guys that could get drafted ahead of him, though. I think Max Clare is going to get drafted ahead of him out of Ohio State. I think Kenyon, Sadiq, and Eli Stowers are absolute locks. I just worry about Justin Jolly, but we did see it last year where Harold Fannin Jr. fell to round 3 after a lot of us sort of hoped for round 2 and absolutely cooked. So Justin Jolly, your classic move tight end out of NC State. Really like him a lot. Fun player. 23 overall and 24 overall for me. A pair of wide receivers and a pair of good ones. The first one for me is Antonio Williams out of Clemson. Just an interesting player. I think projects to be a player that earns targets at the NFL level. Potentially a starting wide receiver at the NFL level. 21 years old, coming out of Clemson. Incredible production as a Tiger. So was really the centerpiece of their offense. I think he projects as a player who could end up being a slot at the next level. We want to see the landing spot be beneficial. But if Antonio Williams lands correctly, I think he could have a immediate production for a number of NFL teams. He's sort of easy to project at the next level. Zachariah Branch is one of the more polarizing players when it comes to what do you think about him? Now, I've talked to some people this year that are into Zachariah Branch, and when you look at Zachariah Branch, he's going to absolutely fly at the NFL Combine. He's going to run an absurdly fast 40-yard dash time, and he has to because he's undersized. But we did have the production this year at Georgia. 81 catches, over 800 receiving yards. So we did see that production this year from Zachariah Branch. He's going to have to be used a lot in like things like the screen game, but he's still a player that if he lands well and threads the needle landing spot-wise, you could have a fun offensive coordinator who could do some things with Zachariah Branch. So I think the draft capital is going to be very kind to Zachariah Branch. Is he a gadget guy, or is he a guy that speed can translate to a little bit more? I'm open-minded for this one, but there's polarizing thoughts on both sides of the fence with this one. Some people just brushing him aside, but he is electric and can do some things with the ball in his hands. So Antonio Williams at 23, Zachariah Branch at 24, and then Max Clare of Ohio State, who had 40-plus receptions this year for the Buckeyes. Also at Purdue, he's got a 50-plus catch season. He's got the size. I've been mixing him in as a best ball target, too, because I think Max Clare is going to have very good draft capital. Again, we're talking tight end premium here, but he's 6'5", has the ability to get on an NFL field very, very quickly. And if he lands well and teams want to use him in that sense, I think he's a chance that he could be a productive fantasy football asset, and he certainly will have the draft capital to reflect it. So again, these are tight end premium. So I end up having 4 tight ends here. I also mentioned Michael Trigg. This is my top 25 rankings. Let me know who I had too high. Let me know who I had too low. And I really hope that I didn't forget anybody, because I am basing this on an article, so I'm going to go through it again. Once in a while, you miss something when you do these sort of shows, but hopefully we covered it all. Big shout out to the Dynasty Life audience. We're going to keep rocking and rolling all off season long. Big shout out to the Fantasy Points audience in general. Felt weird not recording for like over a week. We're back at it, though. I'm recording multiple shows every single week. Fantasy Football Daily, Dynasty Life. You already know what it is. 2026 NFL Draft Podcast with Brett Whitefield, School of Scott with Scott Barrett. All of my Dynasty rankings are over at fantasypoints.com. You can use the code FANTASY, get 10% off. All of my articles are over there, and we're everywhere here at Fantasy Points. I'm recording on Sunday with Ryan Heath. Sunday morning recording just to get you the best information you can to crush your Dynasty leagues this season. We'll see you soon.